Hi, and welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be talking about slope. And if you are working in Study Island, it is the topic called Slope in Study Island, where you can get more practice questions like these. However, there are lots of different questions under that topic, so I broke it down into 3 different videos. So if you're working there, make sure you watch all 3 videos and study that information, and then go and work in Study Island to get more practice. So in today's part, we're going to be looking at how to calculate slope from an equation, 2 points, a table, graph, and word problems. And don't forget that slope is the rate of change. That's the definition of slope. So it's how fast or how slow something is changing. Sometimes we calculate it by counting the rise over run, and sometimes we calculate it by subtracting the y's over subtracting the x's. So I'm glad that you're here today, and I hope you're ready to learn something new.
Before we start in on examples, I wanted to go over a few notes. So like I said, slope, you can be asked to calculate slope from 5 different ways in Study Island, and on your EOI you have from an equation, from a line, from 2 points, a table, and a word problem. Word problem we're going to address by itself in part 3. So I'll do a couple quick notes here, but you're not going to see any examples. To see all those examples about word problems, you're going to want to watch part 3. First, let's look at how to find the slope when you're given an equation. When you're given an equation, it has to be in slope-intercept form. So that means y equals the x term plus or minus the y-intercept. Once you have it in that y equals slope-intercept form, and then it's just going to be the number in front of x. So here, in this example, the number in front of x is negative 2/3. So negative 2/3 is my slope number. When you're given a line, you can count the rise over the run. The one part you have to remember here is to look if it's a downhill line or an uphill line, and whether or not that's going to be a positive or negative slope. So when you count it, you're going to be looking for 2 spots, any 2 spots work, where that line crosses the corner of the grid paper. So I've marked out 1, and here's another one on the y-axis. So you're just going to count how much you rise and how much you run. So this one, the rise of 1, and then I'm going to run 1, 2, 3 spots. Now this line is going downhill. Downhill means it's going to be a negative slope. So my slope here is negative 1/3. When I'm given 2 points, this is going to be, and you're going to be using the formula. Remember, your formula is you subtract the y's on top and you subtract the x's on the bottom. And you just have to be consistent. If I subtract if I subtract 2 first on the top, then I have to subtract negative 5 first on the bottom. So whichever point you pull from first on the top, you have to pull from first on the bottom also. So here I would have 2 minus 3. And then on the bottom, since I started with 2, I have to start with negative 5. And I would have negative 5 minus 2. Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 1. And then negative 5 minus 2 is negative 7. So negative 1 over negative 7, that simplifies to a positive 1 over 7. If any of this is tricky for you, you can feel free, if you have a good fraction button on your calculator, you can actually just put this whole equation into your fraction button and press enter. The next place we're going to look at here is the table. The table you're going to pick is going to be that same formula, only here you have 3 sets of data to pick from. You can choose any 2 of those. So lots of times people they don't want to use this first one because of the negative number, or other people really like it because it has the 0. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. You just need to pick 2. I'm going to pick these two and I'm going to subtract my y's, and you can do it in any order, 20 minus 8. But since I picked 20 first on top, I have to pick the 4 first on the bottom. So 4 minus 2, I've subtract my x numbers on the bottom. 20 minus 8 is 12, and 4 minus 2 is 2. 12 over 2 simplifies to 6. And the last one you have is a word problem. An oil tank contains 100 gallons of oil. When Paul starts to fill it, Paul pumps oil at the rate of 20 gallons per minute. And the short version of this is you're going to be looking for that per number. So right here is the word I have, is where per is in my word problem. And so my slope number there is going to be 20. And so we're going to go more in depth than that in the part 3 of this video series on slope, but that's the short version for now. So if you need more time to take the notes, feel free to pause. And if not, then we're going to go ahead and look at our next example. In number 1, here they give us 2 points to calculate the slope from. So this is, if we look back at our notes, this is going to be where you use the y subtracted and the x subtracted. That's going to be our formula. And so just remember, if your y numbers in the coordinate is always that second number, and a coordinate is always the x number first and then the y coordinate. So here I have the y's. It's going to be 1 minus 0. I chose to subtract in that order to make my top number positive. You could subtract in the other order. Just remember you have to be consistent. Since I did 1 first on the top, that means I have to do the x with that 1, which is -1 here first on the bottom. So it's going to be -1 minus, and my other x number is -3. So 1 minus 0 on the top is 1, and -1 minus -3 is a positive 2. And if you still have trouble with your integer operations, adding and subtracting with negative numbers, feel free to use the calculator to check yourself. And so my answer here is C, 1/2. So same thing with this example, it has 2 points. So I'm going to be using my formula where you subtract the y's on top and subtract the x's on the bottom. So my y numbers here are 1 and 4. So I'm going to subtract 1 minus 4 on the top. And then my x numbers here are -4 and 5. So I'm going to subtract them on the bottom. Noticing this point here is the one I used to start both the top and the bottom. You have to have that consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and do that subtraction. 1 minus 4 is -3. And then on the bottom, -4 minus 5 is -9. -3 over -9, that simplifies down to 1/3. And remember, like I said before, you can use a calculator to check you at any point on any of these steps. There's no shame in that. And double checking that you get it right or wrong. So our answer here is C, 1/3. What is the slope of the line defined by the table above? So once we're using a table, and if you look back at your notes, when you're calculating from the table, we're still using our formula where you subtract the y's and subtract the x's. Only thing is here, you can pick any 2 rows you want to. It's your choice. So you just got to pick 2 and stick with those 2. So I think 0 is pretty easy to work with. So I'm going to work with 0 and 2. And I just like the numbers 10, so I'm going to work with 10 also. So you can pick another 2 rows. As long as you're not jumping around, you pick 2 rows and stick with those 2 rows. So here my y numbers are 2 and 10. I'm going to do 10 minus 2 to make my top positive. And since I started my top with this y, I have to start my bottom with this x. So my x numbers here are 10 and 0. And so it's going to be 10 minus 0 on the bottom. And then I'll go ahead and do those subtraction. I have 10 minus 2 on the top is 8. and 10 minus 0 on the bottom is 10. 8 over 10, that simplifies to 4 over 5. So my answer here is going to be letter B. Right, this example here asks us to calculate slope from another table. So once again, I'm using that same formula that you're going to want to have memorized for your EOI, where you subtract the y's on top and subtract your x's on the bottom. And once again, you can pick any two. I like to work with smaller numbers, so I'm going to pick those first two. But if you like higher numbers, feel free to pick the other two or a mix, as long as you're sticking with 2 rows. So here my y numbers are 5 and 7. I'm going to do 7 minus 5, so that I'm working with a positive number on the top. You could do 5 minus 7 the other way around, as long as you're consistent on your bottom being the other way around also. So since I started though with my y number of 7, I have to start with my x number of 5. So my two x numbers are 5 and 0, so I'm going to have 5 minus 0 on the bottom. So when I go ahead and do that subtraction, 7 minus 5 is 2. And then on the bottom, that subtraction, 5 minus 0 is 5. So my answer to this problem is 2/5. All right, here's another example. It says, what is the slope of the line given by the following equation? Y equals negative 5x plus 6. So if we look back at our notes, it says that we have to find the slope in an equation. You want it to be in y equals form first, slope-intercept form. So it's y equals all by itself over here, so it's in that slope-intercept form already. So we're pretty excited because the majority of the work has already been done for us. So now we just have to look at the coefficient on the x term. The number in front of x is our slope number. So here that's negative 5. So that means C is our answer, negative 5. It's as simple as identifying the number in front of x once it's in that y-intercept form or y equals. This example is very similar. It's what is the slope of the line given by the linear equation above. However, this is not in y equals. So I'm going to have to rewrite this equation in slope-intercept form, meaning I need to get that y completely by itself. So I just went ahead and rewrote the equation to help us out. So I have this 4x and this minus 9 that I need to move away from the left side so that I have just y on the left. So when you're rewriting a linear equation, the first thing you're going to do when solving for y is to move that x term first. So this is a positive 4x. So that means I'm going to be subtracting 4x from both sides. Okay. And the reason I do that is these 4x's cancel out, and I'm left with just the negative 9y equals 27 minus 4x on the right side. Now I just have a negative 9 stopping the y from being completely by itself. So that's a negative 9 times y. So to undo that multiplication, the opposite of that is a division. So I'm going to have to divide every term by negative 9. So that means I'm dividing negative 9 3 times. Here the negative 9's cancel out, and I'm left with just y equals. Next, 27 divided by negative 9 is negative 3. And then next and last, I work with my x term. So that means that's going to be my slope. I'm going to want to leave that as a fraction. I don't want to turn that into a decimal. So negative 4 over negative 9, that's going to become a positive. A negative over a negative is a positive. And 4/9 doesn't simplify, so it just stays 4/9 x. And now it's in that y equals form. So all I have to do is look at the coefficient in front of x, the number in front of x, to find my slope number. So here, that's 4/9. So that means my answer is A, 4/9. In this next example, It's asking us to determine the slope from the line above, and we are given a graph. So you're going to want to find where that line crosses any corner of the grid paper. So we're looking at the corner. So it crosses a corner here, crosses a corner here, crosses a corner here. We just need 2 of those though. So whichever 2 you want to work with, it's perfectly up to you. I usually recommend working with 2 that are closer together versus 2 that are further apart. So I'm going to work with these first 2, and I'm going to go ahead and when you're working with a graph on grid paper, you want to count the rise over the run. So here, this one rises 2 times, and then it runs 1, 2, 3 blocks. And it's an uphill line, so that means I'm going to have a positive slope. So my answer here is going to be letter D. This is a very similar example. Once again, I'm finding the slope from a graph, so I want to find 2 spots where it crosses a corner of the grid paper. So this one actually has 3, but you can pick any of those 2. And once again, you want to count the rise over the run. So the rise here is 1. And then the run for my denominator is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once again, this is the part that people often forget. You want to think about, is this a downhill line, negative slope, or uphill line, positive slope? This one is slowly increasing, so it's going to be a positive slope. 1 over 5 is my answer. So my answer here is going to be letter C. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.